There is a moment in the life of many chosen ones when the desire for revenge begins whispering in the background of their thoughts. It usually comes after betrayal, after disrespect, or after watching someone walk away from you while pretending they did nothing wrong. The mind starts replaying the story over and over, imagining different endings where the truth is finally exposed and the person who hurt you is forced to face the consequences of what they did. In those moments, it can feel like silence is the same thing as weakness. It can feel like walking away means the other person won. But one of the deepest lessons a chosen one eventually learns is this: you do not need revenge to receive justice. Life itself has a way of balancing things in ways you could never design on your own. This principle is often misunderstood. It does not mean wishing harm on the people who hurt you. It does not mean waiting for tragedy to strike them so you can feel satisfied. Instead, it means understanding a law that quietly governs human behavior over time. What people plant eventually grows. Every action carries a direction, and that direction eventually produces a result. Someone who plants dishonesty will eventually face the consequences of broken trust. Someone who plants manipulation will eventually find themselves surrounded by suspicion. Someone who plants cruelty will eventually experience the loneliness that cruelty creates. The timeline of these consequences rarely follows the schedule our emotions prefer. That delay is often what makes revenge feel tempting in the first place. When someone harms you and appears to move forward without any visible consequence, the situation can feel deeply unfair. Your mind may start telling you that justice requires your participation. The thought appears quietly at first. Maybe you should expose them, confront them publicly, or return the same energy they gave you. In that moment, revenge begins disguising itself as fairness.
But the chosen one's path leads somewhere different. The assignment of the chosen one is not retaliation. The assignment is elevation. Elevation requires emotional discipline because it asks you to step out of the cycle of reaction that the other person may still be living inside. When someone wrongs you and you respond with the same behavior, you remain connected to the very pattern that hurt you. Your attention stays fixed on the past, and your energy becomes tied to someone else's choices. Revenge keeps the story alive inside your mind, long after the moment has passed. That is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. When you refuse to retaliate, it may appear as if nothing is happening. The person who hurt you continues living their life, and you continue carrying the memory of what occurred. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is space. It creates distance between you and the situation, so that life itself can begin revealing the consequences that belong to each person's choices. The chosen one learns to trust that process. Trusting this process does not mean pretending the pain never existed. It means recognizing that the energy you invest in revenge cannot be invested in building the life you were meant to create. Every moment spent trying to punish someone else is a moment taken away from your own growth. When you shift your focus from retaliation to elevation, something subtle but powerful begins happening. Your attention moves away from the person who hurt you and toward the direction your life is meant to go. This shift creates the conditions where natural consequences begin unfolding without your involvement. People reveal themselves through patterns. Someone who lies once may escape immediate consequences, but someone who lies repeatedly eventually creates contradictions that others notice. Someone who manipulates relationships may succeed temporarily, but repeated manipulation leaves a trail of broken trust that grows harder to hide over time.
Life does not need your help to expose these patterns. Patterns speak for themselves when time is allowed to reveal them. The chosen one's role is not to accelerate this process through anger or public confrontation. Your role is to remain aligned with the principles that protect your peace. Alignment means choosing actions that do not stain your own integrity while waiting for the natural unfolding of consequences that belong to others. This approach may appear passive to those who do not understand it, but in reality, it requires tremendous strength. It takes discipline to resist the urge to retaliate when emotions are strong. It takes patience to trust that truth will eventually surface without your constant defense. And it takes clarity to remember that your future is far more important than rewriting the past. When a chosen one embraces this principle, revenge loses its appeal. You begin realizing that the most powerful response to betrayal is not punishment, but transformation. The person who hurt you expected your attention to remain trapped in the conflict. When you redirect that attention toward growth, the entire dynamic changes. Your life begins moving forward, while the consequences of their behavior slowly unfold in the background. And as this understanding deepens, another truth becomes clear. Life has many ways of balancing the scales that do not require your hands at all. Once the chosen one steps out of the cycle of retaliation and begins focusing on growth, something interesting begins unfolding that many people do not notice at first. Life has its own mechanisms for balancing situations where harm or deception once existed. These mechanisms do not arrive suddenly like dramatic punishment. Instead, they appear gradually through patterns that reveal themselves over time. The first way life often repays someone who acted dishonestly or manipulatively is through exposure. Exposure does not always come through confrontation or public accusations.
In fact, the most powerful exposure often happens quietly, through repetition. A person who relies on deception rarely limits that behavior to one relationship. Patterns repeat because they are part of a person's character rather than a single mistake. The story that once confused you begins repeating itself with someone else. The same manipulation appears again in a different context. The same contradictions begin surfacing in conversations with other people. At first, others may not recognize the pattern clearly, just as you once struggled to understand what was happening. But over time, inconsistencies accumulate. Words no longer match actions. Promises are broken more than they are kept. The narrative they present about themselves begins colliding with observable behavior. This is the moment when exposure naturally unfolds. The chosen one does not need to explain the truth, because the pattern begins speaking louder than any defense you could have offered. Truth has a unique quality that eventually surfaces through consistency. When someone repeatedly contradicts their own story, the mask they created becomes difficult to maintain. People around them begin noticing small details that once went ignored. Doubt slowly replaces trust. And once trust begins cracking, the person who relied on deception finds themselves constantly trying to repair a reputation that no longer feels stable. The second way life repays harmful behavior is through loss of access. Access is one of the most valuable forms of currency in relationships. Access to trust, access to opportunities, access to supportive environments, and access to people who believe in your character. When someone repeatedly damages trust, those forms of access begin closing quietly. Opportunities that once appeared easily begin disappearing. Relationships that once felt open become distant. Conversations grow shorter. Invitations stop arriving. None of these changes require dramatic announcements. Eyes close silently when the people behind those doors no longer feel safe opening them. For someone who built influence through manipulation, this quiet loss of access can feel confusing at first. They may not immediately understand why certain relationships fade or why new opportunities seem harder to maintain. But the truth behind this shift is simple. Trust functions like a form of social capital. Each dishonest action withdraws from that account. When enough withdrawals occur, the balance eventually runs out. Rebuilding that trust becomes extremely difficult because the memory of previous behavior lingers in the minds of others. Even if the person attempts to repair their reputation, people remain cautious. The same tactics that once worked no longer produce the same results, because others have learned to recognize the pattern. The third way life repays harmful behavior happens internally, inside the person themselves. This consequence is often invisible from the outside, but it may be the most powerful of all. When someone repeatedly acts against their own integrity, their inner stability begins weakening. They may appear confident in public, but internally, their nervous system becomes increasingly defensive. Suspicion grows because they assume others might treat them the same way they treated others. Paranoia appears because dishonesty creates the constant fear of being exposed. Even in situations where nothing is wrong, their mind remains alert for threats that may not exist. Peace becomes difficult to maintain because peace requires alignment between actions and values. When that alignment breaks, the mind carries tension that cannot easily be silenced. Over time, this internal instability affects every part of their life. Conversations become defensive because they expect criticism. Relationships feel fragile because trust has already been broken elsewhere. Small disagreements trigger exaggerated reactions because the person senses how unstable their position has become. From the outside, they may still appear successful or socially active, but internally, their environment becomes increasingly uncomfortable. This is why true peace often belongs to those who live with integrity. Peace is not something that can be performed publicly. It is the quiet stability that appears when a person no longer fears the consequences of their own actions. When chosen ones understand these mechanisms, the desire for revenge begins fading naturally. Exposure happens through patterns. Access disappears through broken trust. And internal instability grows when someone repeatedly abandons their own integrity. None of these consequences require your participation. Life unfolds them gradually, as time reveals the direction each person has chosen through their behavior. And as your own life begins rising beyond the conflict, the universe itself begins rearranging who can continue standing beside you on the path ahead. As time continues moving forward, and the chosen one remains focused on growth rather than retaliation, another layer of life's balance begins revealing itself. Unlike exposure or the quiet loss of access, this stage becomes visible in a way that even the person who once hurt you cannot ignore. The life you continue building begins creating a reality that no longer includes the people who once tried to limit or dismiss you. And through that shift, two powerful consequences appear naturally: replacement and the mirror lesson. The first of these is replacement. When someone walks away from you during a season where you are still building your life, they often believe they are leaving behind something that will never become significant. They assume the version of you they saw at that moment will remain unchanged. Perhaps they saw uncertainty, struggle, or the slow progress that accompanies every long-term effort. Because the results had not yet appeared, they underestimated the direction you were moving toward. But growth does not stop simply because someone else fails to recognize it. The chosen one continues building quietly. Discipline continues shaping your habits. Lessons from past experiences refine your judgment. Slowly, the life you once imagined begins becoming visible. New opportunities appear. New relationships form. The environment surrounding you becomes healthier and more aligned with who you are becoming. At that moment, the absence of the person who once dismissed you becomes impossible for them to ignore. They see the results that once existed only as potential. They see the stability, the clarity, and the opportunities that have grown from the seeds you planted earlier. What they once considered insignificant has now become undeniable. This is the moment when replacement reveals itself. You find better environments, better partnerships, and better support systems than the ones that existed during your earlier seasons. These new connections are not simply substitutes for the people who left. They are improvements that align more closely with the person you have become. The chosen one learns that when someone exits your life during a period of growth, they are unknowingly creating space for something stronger to enter. Replacement does not always mean a new person who fills the same role. Sometimes, it means an entirely different environment that supports your purpose in ways the previous relationship never could. For the individual who once underestimated you, watching this transformation can create a kind of quiet discomfort. They cannot argue with the results. They cannot dismiss the progress that is now visible. The life they once believed would remain small has grown beyond their expectations. This realization often carries a weight that words cannot easily relieve. The second consequence life delivers is what can be called the mirror lesson.
If replacement shows them what they lost, the mirror lesson shows them what they once were. Human behavior tends to repeat itself until it is fully understood. Someone who manipulates, deceives, or disrespects others often continues those patterns in different relationships without realizing how destructive they truly are. Because they never experienced the consequences from the other side, they may believe their behavior is normal or justified. But life has a way of reflecting those patterns back through new experiences. Eventually, the person who once used manipulation encounters someone who operates with the same tactics. They meet a personality that mirrors their own behavior in ways they cannot control. The confusion they once created for others now appears in their own life. Conversations become difficult to understand. Promises feel unreliable. Emotional games replace honest communication. For the first time, they experience the same uncertainty that their behavior once created in someone else. This moment does not always arrive immediately. Sometimes it appears years later through relationships that follow the same destructive patterns. But when it arrives, the lesson becomes unmistakable. The tactics they once used begin working against them. The manipulation they relied on becomes a trap they cannot escape because someone else is now playing the same game. The chosen one rarely witnesses this moment directly. In many cases, you will hear fragments of the story from others or notice subtle signs that the person's life has become more chaotic than before. But whether you see it or not, the mirror lesson unfolds naturally because patterns eventually collide with themselves. The lesson returns wearing a different face, but it carries the same energy that was once given to others. When chosen ones understand these mechanisms, something powerful happens internally. The desire for revenge dissolves because the balance of life becomes visible without your involvement. You realize that the people who laughed when you were still building now watch from a distance as your life stabilizes and grows. The individuals who once played emotional games eventually encounter someone they cannot easily manipulate. And through these experiences, life itself teaches the lessons that anger once tried to force. This realization brings a kind of quiet peace. Instead of carrying resentment, you continue walking forward while the consequences of past behavior unfold naturally behind you. Once a chosen one understands how life naturally balances situations through exposure, loss of access, replacement, and mirror lessons, a new question appears. If life itself eventually reveals the truth, what is your role while all of this unfolds? The answer is simpler than most people expect, yet it requires a level of discipline that many struggle to maintain. Your role is not to force consequences. Your role is to remain aligned while those consequences reveal themselves. Alignment means living in a way that keeps your integrity intact, even when emotions tempt you to react. When someone hurts you deeply, the mind often begins searching for closure from the person who caused the pain. You may want them to explain their actions, to admit the truth, or to finally acknowledge the impact of what happened. But one of the hardest lessons chosen ones learn is that closure rarely comes from people who avoid accountability. Someone who lacks the self-awareness to recognize their own behavior is unlikely to provide the clarity you are hoping to hear.
Chasing that explanation can trap you in endless conversations that circle around the same denial or justification. Instead of bringing peace, these discussions often reopen the same emotional wound repeatedly. This is why the chosen one eventually stops chasing closure from people who are committed to misunderstanding them. Peace comes from accepting that some people will never tell the truth about what they did. Once you accept that reality, your attention returns to the only part of the situation you truly control: your response moving forward. Another important part of this role involves boundaries. Many people believe boundaries must always be announced in dramatic conversations where every detail is explained. But in many cases, the strongest boundaries appear through quiet action rather than long explanations. When someone repeatedly disrespects you or manipulates the situation, continuing to explain your feelings often provides them with more material to distort later. The chosen one learns that boundaries do not always require a speech. They require consistency. When a pattern appears again, your behavior changes. Access becomes limited. Conversations become shorter. Invitations to certain areas of your life quietly disappear. Over time, these adjustments communicate a message far more clearly than any argument could. The person who crossed the line eventually realizes that their previous behavior no longer grants them the same position in your life. At the same time, the chosen one moves through life with a kind of calm discipline that protects both your reputation and your future. You move quietly, rather than announcing every step of your progress. You document facts, rather than relying on emotional reactions when conflicts appear. If situations require proof of what truly happened, the truth remains available without needing dramatic confrontation. This approach removes the chaos that often surrounds conflicts driven by emotion. Instead of becoming entangled in arguments, you allow your consistent actions to speak over time. There are also certain traps the chosen one learns to avoid during this process. One common trap is the temptation to respond indirectly through public messages or subtle attacks designed to hint at what happened. Social media posts, cryptic comments, or attempts to expose the other person publicly may feel satisfying for a moment, but they often keep your attention tied to the same conflict you are trying to leave behind. Another trap is the belief that returning the same energy just once will restore balance. In reality, responding with the same behavior only extends the cycle you are trying to escape. The final trap is the attempt to make the other person understand your perspective completely. When someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no explanation will change their interpretation. Continuing to argue for understanding only drains the energy needed to build your future. The chosen one eventually replaces these reactions with a different focus. Instead of replaying the story in your mind, you protect your attention from endless rumination. Instead of defending your reputation in every conversation, you protect your name by living in a way that remains consistent with truth. And instead of investing emotional energy into the past, you invest that energy into the life you are building ahead. Over time, this disciplined focus creates a powerful shift. The person who once hurt you becomes less and less central to your thoughts. The story loses its emotional weight because your life has moved into new environments where that conflict no longer defines your direction. This is the quiet strength of letting life handle what once felt unbearable. Your role is not to punish the past. Your role is to keep your path clean so the future you are building remains untouched by the bitterness that once tried to slow you down. As the chosen one continues walking forward with clarity, a deeper realization begins settling into place. The story that once felt heavy, the betrayal, the unfairness, the unanswered questions, slowly loses its power over your mind. Not because the past suddenly becomes acceptable, and not because what happened was harmless, but because your life has grown beyond the space where that story once lived. In the beginning, it may have felt like justice required something dramatic, perhaps an apology,
public recognition of the truth, or a moment where the person who hurt you finally faced undeniable consequences. But over time, you begin seeing something that is far more powerful than any confrontation could have been. The cleanest form of revenge is not revenge at all. It is a clean life. A life where your actions remain aligned with integrity, even when others chose deception. A life where your peace becomes more valuable than proving a point to someone who refused to see the truth in the first place. When a chosen one reaches this level of understanding, bitterness starts fading naturally. Bitterness requires constant attention to the person who caused the pain. It asks you to replay the same story repeatedly in your mind while waiting for the moment when balance finally appears. But alignment works differently. Alignment shifts your attention away from the person who hurt you and toward the direction your life is meant to go. Every decision you make begins reflecting the values you want to live by, rather than the wounds you are trying to escape. This shift creates something that many people misunderstand about justice. The universe does not reward bitterness. It rewards alignment. When your actions remain clean, the consequences of other people's behavior unfold without attaching themselves to you. If someone's dishonesty eventually exposes them, your name remains untouched because you did not participate in the same behavior. If their manipulation damages their reputation over time, your integrity stands separate from the chaos surrounding them.
The chosen one's peace becomes a form of protection that revenge could never provide. There is also a deeper kind of justice that appears internally. At the beginning of the journey, the story may have lived constantly in your thoughts. You might have replayed conversations in your mind, wondering what you should have said or how the situation could have ended differently. But as your life continues expanding, those memories begin losing their emotional intensity. New experiences replace old wounds. New relationships bring support that the past never offered. The life you are building becomes too full to leave space for constant resentment. This is the moment when the deepest form of justice appears. You become unbothered. Not because you forced yourself to forget what happened, but because the story no longer holds the same emotional weight. The person who once hurt you becomes a chapter in your history rather than the center of your attention. Their choices no longer determine your mood, your focus, or your direction. The chosen one stops needing the other person to pay for what they did in order to feel whole again. Wholeness comes from something much deeper than punishment. It comes from recognizing that your life continued moving forward while their actions remained part of the past. This is why many chosen ones eventually reach a quiet declaration within themselves. They release the need to prove their innocence to people who never intended to listen. They release the need to punish someone whose own actions will eventually create their consequences. And they release the need to control the timeline of justice with their own emotions. Trusting life's timing becomes easier once you see how consistently patterns reveal themselves over time. When someone chooses deception, dishonesty, or manipulation, those choices shape the direction of their life whether you intervene or not. The chosen one's responsibility is not to manage those consequences. Your responsibility is to protect the peace you worked so hard to build. And once that peace becomes your priority, something remarkable happens. The energy that once fueled anger becomes available for something else entirely. It becomes fuel for growth, for purpose, and for the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your life is moving in the right direction. In that moment, the need for revenge disappears completely, because the cleanest revenge was never punishment. The cleanest revenge was becoming the person who no longer needs it. If this message resonates with where you are right now, take it as a reminder that your peace is more powerful than any form of revenge. You don't have to carry the weight of what someone else did forever. Let life handle what belongs to life, and focus your energy on building something better. Comment, "I release it," if you're choosing to let go of the past and move forward with clarity. And subscribe if you're walking the chosen one path, where healing replaces bitterness, wisdom replaces reaction, and elevation becomes the answer to everything that once tried to break you.